Rain lashed against the windswept plains of Silver Gulch, Montana, 1892. She huddled beneath the abandoned homestead's leaking roof, cradling a whimpering infant against her chest, while a half-starved border collie pressed against her side for warmth. Eleanor Chapman, 24 years old, widowed, homeless, and fighting tears as she stared into the dying embers of a pathetic fire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The storm had turned from bad to biblical over the last hour, wind howling through the cracks in the cabin walls like vengeful spirits. The baby, little William, barely 8 months old, had finally stopped crying and now made soft hiccuping sounds against her shoulder. The dog, Scout, raised his head suddenly, ears perked toward the door. Eleanor tensed, one hand instinctively tightening around her son. They'd been on the run for 3 weeks now, ever since her husband's family had made their intentions horrifyingly clear. The baby belonged with them, not with a penniless farmer's daughter they'd never approved of. Her marriage certificate had mysteriously disappeared from the family Bible after Thomas's funeral, and her in-laws, the wealthy and influential Chapmans of Boston, had powerful friends in the courthouse. So she'd fled west, her meager savings dwindling with each passing day, until the broken wheel on her rented wagon had stranded her here, miles from the nearest town. The rain had started soon after, turning the dirt road into a river of mud. A heavy knock rattled the warped door. "Hello?" A deep voice called over the storm. "Anybody in there?" Eleanor froze, her pulse racing. Scout growled low in his throat. "I saw smoke from the road," the voice continued. "Just checking if you need help." She weighed her options quickly. The stranger could be dangerous, or he could be her only hope of surviving the night. The baby was developing a cough, and they had no food left. "Doors unlocked," she called, positioning herself in the shadows. Scout moved protectively in front of her, hackles raised. The door creaked open, admitting a gust of rain and a tall figure silhouetted against a flash of lightning. He stepped inside, water streaming from his duster and wide-brimmed hat. Even in the dim light, Eleanor could see he was built like a man who worked hard for his living. Broad shoulders, weather-beaten hands, a stance solid as oak. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat. His face came into view, strong-jawed, with eyes that missed nothing, taking in the pathetic fire, the bundle in her arms, the protective dog. "Looks like you could use some help." "We're fine," Eleanor said automatically, the lie transparent even to her own ears. The stranger's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Not pity, exactly, but a quiet understanding that made Eleanor's throat tighten. "Name's Jackson Ryder," he said. "Got a ranch about 3 miles east of here." A low whimper escaped William, and Eleanor instinctively rocked him. Scout hadn't relaxed his guard, but his tail gave a single, uncertain wag. "Eleanor," she offered cautiously. "Eleanor Chapman. This is William, and that's Scout." Jackson nodded toward the fire. "Mind if I build that up some? This little one shouldn't be in the cold." Before she could respond, he was already moving, pulling kindling from his saddlebag and expertly coaxing the dying embers back to life. In minutes, warm light flooded the cabin, revealing its sorry state. Holes in the roof, rotting floorboards, abandoned years ago by whoever had tried and failed to tame this stretch of Montana wilderness. It also revealed Eleanor more clearly. Her once fine blue dress now travel-stained and torn at the hem, her boots worn through, her face smudged with dirt and exhaustion but still holding a stubborn dignity. "I don't need charity," she said, lifting her chin. Jackson paused, straightening from the now crackling fire. "Never thought you did, but that little one needs warmth, and looks to me like you all could use a hot meal." From his saddlebag, he produced bread, jerky, and a flask of what turned out to be hot coffee. The simple kindness nearly undid Eleanor's careful composure. When was the last time someone had thought of her comfort? "Why are you helping us?" she asked, finally accepting the food with trembling hands. Jackson settled on the other side of the fire, respecting her space. "Out here you help folks in need. Never know when you might be the one needing it next." As Eleanor ate, slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, Jackson spoke casually about his ranch, about the weather, about nothing of consequence. It was the quiet consideration in his voice, the way he didn't ask why a woman with a baby and a dog was alone in an abandoned cabin during a storm, that finally broke through her defenses. "They're trying to take him from me," she said suddenly, looking down at William, now sleeping against her chest. "My husband's family. They say I'm unfit to raise him." Jackson's eyes hardened, but his voice remained steady. "Are you running from them?" Eleanor nodded, too exhausted to lie. "Thomas, my husband, died of fever 3 months ago. His parents never approved of me. Said their son had married beneath him." A bitter smile twisted her lips. "They waited until after the funeral to tell me they'd be taking custody of William. That I could visit on holidays if I behaved appropriately. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. So you ran. Wouldn't you?" The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Jackson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I believe I would." The storm raged on outside, but inside, the fire had chased away the worst of the chill. William slept peacefully, and even Scout had relaxed enough to accept a piece of jerky from Jackson's hand. "The wagon's wheel broke about a mile back," Eleanor continued, the words spilling out now. "I was trying to reach Silver Springs before nightfall." "Rough country to travel alone," Jackson observed, without judgment. "I didn't have a choice," Eleanor replied. "They have connections everywhere. Judges, lawyers. Even the police in Boston were friendly with the Chapmans." Jackson's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "They know you headed west?" "I don't think so. I left in the middle of the night. Took a roundabout route." She brushed a tender hand over William's soft hair. "But they'll keep looking. Thomas was their only child. William is their only grandchild." "Rich folks," Jackson said, as if that explained everything. "Very." Eleanor's mouth tightened. "Mr. Chapman owns half the textile mills in Massachusetts." "And you? Where's your family?" "Gone. My father was a schoolteacher. Mother died when I was young. Father passed last year. It was just me until I met Thomas." She looked down at William. "Now it's just us." The fire popped and crackled, filling the silence. Outside, the rain began to slacken, the worst of the storm passing. "My ranch isn't much," Jackson said finally, "but there's a cabin where the foreman used to stay before he moved into town with his wife. Empty now, clean, dry." He met her eyes across the fire. "You'd be welcome to it if you wanted. Until you figure things out." Eleanor stared at him, searching for ulterior motives, for hidden dangers. She found only steady honesty in his weathered face. "Why would you do that for strangers?" she asked. Something passed across Jackson's face. An old pain, quickly masked. "Like I said, out here we help each other." Eleanor knew she should refuse. A single woman accepting shelter from a man she'd just met. It wasn't proper, but propriety seemed a laughable concern when weighed against her son's welfare. "I can cook," she offered, "and so I could earn my keep." Never doubted it. Jackson stood, dusting off his pants. "Storm's letting up. If you're willing, we should head out before it starts again." Eleanor rose shakily to her feet, the baby secure in her arms. "My things. In the wagon. We'll swing by, get what we can salvage." Within an hour, they were on the move. Eleanor and William on Jackson's horse, Scout trotting alongside, Jackson leading them on foot. The wagon had yielded little. A small trunk of clothing, a few books, a silver hairbrush that had been her mother's. Everything that remained of her old life, packed into one leather trunk, lashed to the saddle. The storm had indeed passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean, stars emerging like diamond chips against black velvet. In the distance, a cluster of lights appeared. Jackson's ranch, Silver Creek, he called it. "It's not much," he said again as they approached, "but no one will bother you here." Eleanor could make out the main house, modest but solid, and several outbuildings. The promised cabin stood a little apart, near a stand of pines. No grand estate like the Chapman mansion, but something about it tugged at Eleanor's heart. A place built with care rather than ostentation. As they drew nearer, a figure emerged from the main house. A woman, gray-haired and sturdy, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill. "Jackson Ryder. Been worried sick with you out in that storm," she called, then stopped short at the sight of Eleanor and the baby. "Well now, who do we have here?" "Mrs. Hollis. This is Mrs. Chapman and her son William," Jackson explained, helping Eleanor dismount. "Their wagon broke down. They'll be staying in the foreman's cabin for a spell." Eleanor tensed, waiting for suspicion, for judgment. Instead, Mrs. Hollis clucked her tongue and hurried forward. Poor dears, caught in that awful weather. "Come inside this minute. I've stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven." The warmth of the ranch house enveloped Eleanor like an embrace as she stepped inside. Clean, simple, but with touches that spoke of a home rather than just a house. Handmade quilts, books on shelves, wildflowers in a mason jar on the table. "Mrs. Hollis is our housekeeper," Jackson explained, hanging his duster by the door. "Has been since my parents were alive. Raised this boy from a pup," Mrs. Hollis said with obvious affection. "Though still haven't managed to teach him to come in out of the rain." As the older woman fussed over William, cooing at his big eyes and chubby cheeks, Eleanor felt a knot of tension begin to loosen in her chest. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt safe. Later, after a meal that tasted like heaven after days of hardtack and jerky, Mrs. Hollis showed Eleanor to the foreman's cabin. It was indeed clean and dry. A single room with a sturdy bed, a small stove, a table and chair, even a cradle that Mrs. Hollis explained had been Jackson's as a baby. "Been in the attic gathering dust," she said, settling it by the bed. "About time it got some use again." When they were alone, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, William already asleep in the cradle, Scout curled protectively nearby. Everything had happened so quickly. This morning she'd been desperate, alone, with no plan beyond staying ahead of the Chapmans' reach. Now she had shelter, safety, at least for the moment. But at what cost? What would Jackson Ryder expect in return? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Jackson stood outside holding a small bundle. "Some of my mother's things," he explained, handing it to her. "Mrs. Hollis thought you might need them." Eleanor unwrapped the bundle to find nightclothes, a hairbrush, soap that smelled of lavender. Simple things that suddenly seemed like extravagant luxuries. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice threatening to break. Jackson nodded, his eyes briefly meeting hers before looking away. "Get some rest, Mrs. Chapman. You're safe here." As he turned to go, Eleanor found her voice again. "Why are you doing this, really?" Jackson paused, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the night sky. For a long moment he was silent, and Eleanor thought he might not answer. "My sister," he finally said, so quietly she almost missed it. "They took her boy, her husband's family, rich folks from Chicago. She died in childbirth, and they said a rancher had no business raising a city boy." His hand tightened on the doorframe. "By the time I got there, they were gone. Never saw my nephew again." He turned back, his face half in shadow. "No child should be taken from someone who loves them, Mrs. Chapman. Not if there's anything I can do about it." With that, he was gone, leaving Eleanor staring after him, tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally spilling down her cheeks. Morning broke clear and golden over Silver Creek Ranch. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through clean curtains, the unfamiliar sensation of a real bed beneath her, and the sound of William babbling happily in his cradle. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where they were. Then it all came flooding back. The cabin looked even better in daylight. Small but sound, with a cheerful red rug on the floor, and curtains printed with tiny blue flowers. Someone had left a basket by the door, containing fresh eggs, bread, and a jar of milk. After washing and dressing in the cleanest of her travel-worn clothes, Eleanor ventured outside with William on her hip and Scout at her heels. Silver Creek Ranch spread before her in the morning light, not vast but well kept. with green pastures where cattle grazed, a barn, stables, a chicken coop, a vegetable garden, and beyond, silver blue mountains rising against the sky. "Good morning." Jackson approached from the direction of the barn, his sleeves rolled up, already well into his day's work. In daylight, Eleanor could see him more clearly, tall and broad-shouldered as she'd thought, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of the Montana sky. Not conventionally handsome, perhaps, but with a strength and steadiness that was its own kind of appeal. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I have in weeks," Eleanor admitted. "Thank you for the food. Mrs. Hollis is doing. She's taken a shine to you." As if summoned by her name, the housekeeper appeared from the main house, waving cheerfully. "Breakfast's on, Mr. Ryder. Plenty for Mrs. Chapman, too, if she's hungry." Over breakfast, eggs, bacon, biscuits with honey, Eleanor learned more about Silver Creek Ranch. It had been in Jackson's family for 2 generations, passed down from his father, who'd claimed the land after the Civil War. "Not the biggest spread in Montana," Jackson explained, "but good land. Enough to make a decent living." "Jackson's being modest," Mrs. Hollis interjected. "Silver Creek's one of the most respected ranches in the territory. His cattle fetch top prices in Helena." A flush of color touched Jackson's tanned cheeks. "Mrs. Hollis thinks I hung the moon," he said dryly. "Someone's got to sing your praises since you won't do it yourself," the older woman retorted affectionately. The easy banter between them, the simple normalcy of the morning, made Eleanor's throat tight with longing. How long had it been since she'd experienced such uncomplicated warmth? "I meant what I said last night," she said when Mrs. Hollis had bustled off to the kitchen. "About earning my keep. I'm not looking for charity." Jackson considered her over his coffee cup. "Ranch always needs an extra pair of hands. What can you do besides cook and sew?" Eleanor straightened in her chair. "I can read and write. Keep accounts. I helped my father with his school for years. I can garden. I'm a quick learner." Something that might have been approval flickered in Jackson's eyes. Mrs. Hollis could use help with the house and garden. Been trying to convince her to slow down for years, but she's stubborn as they come. "I noticed," Eleanor said, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "As for the accounts," Jackson hesitated. "Truth is, they're a mess. Never was much good with figures." "I could look at them," Eleanor offered. "If you'd like." Their eyes met across the table, a moment of understanding passing between them. This wasn't charity. It was an exchange. Work for shelter. Dignity preserved on both sides. "That would be welcome," Jackson said simply. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Eleanor rose early, tending to William, then helping Mrs. Hollis with breakfast for the ranch hands. 4 men who lived in the bunkhouse and treated Eleanor with a gruff, respectful courtesy that gradually relaxed into friendly teasing as weeks passed. Mornings were spent on household tasks: laundry, cleaning, baking, gardening, with William either strapped to her back or playing nearby under Mrs. Hollis's watchful eye. Afternoons, when William napped, Eleanor tackled the ranch accounts, bringing order to years of haphazard bookkeeping. To her surprise, Silver Creek was more prosperous than Jackson had let on. Not wealthy by Chapman standards, certainly, but solid, with steady profits that had been quietly accumulating in the Helena Bank. "You've been undercounting your calves for 3 years," she told Jackson one evening, showing him the corrected figures, "and overpaying for grain. With these adjustments, you could expand the north pasture like you've been wanting to." Jackson studied the neat columns of figures, his brow furrowed. "How did you figure all this out?" "Numbers make sense to me," Eleanor said with a small shrug. "Always have." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something new. "You're full of surprises, Mrs. Chapman." "Eleanor," she corrected softly. "After all this time, I think you can call me Eleanor." Summer bloomed across the valley, turning pastures lush and green, filling the garden with vegetables and wildflowers that Eleanor gathered for the dinner table. William thrived in the clean mountain air, growing chubby and strong, taking his first tottering steps across the cabin floor, while Eleanor and Mrs. Hollis cheered him on. Jackson was a constant, steadying presence, showing up with a rocking chair he'd found in town, repairing a leak in the cabin roof before Eleanor even noticed it was there, always finding some small way to make their lives easier without making it feel like charity. He was good with William, too, his big hands surprisingly gentle, as he showed the boy a newborn foal or lifted him onto his shoulders for a better view of a passing hawk. William adored him, lighting up whenever Jackson appeared, reaching for him with eager hands. "He needs a man in his life," Mrs. Hollis observed one afternoon as they watched Jackson teaching William how to feed a bottle lamb. "A boy should have a father." Eleanor stiffened. "He had one. Thomas was a good man." "Of course he was, dear." Mrs. Hollis patted her hand. "I only meant—" "Well, it's good to see William so happy here. And you too." Happy? The word caught Eleanor by surprise. When had that happened? When had this place, these people, become more than just a temporary refuge? But they were temporary. Had to be. The Chapmans were still out there, still looking. The thought chilled her even in the summer warmth. That evening, Jackson found her on the cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. William was already asleep inside, Scout keeping faithful watch by his cradle. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Jackson settled beside her on the porch step, offering a cup of coffee. Eleanor accepted it gratefully, the evening air carrying the first hint of autumn's approach. "Just thinking about how peaceful it is here." Jackson nodded, his eyes on the distant mountains. "Always thought this was a little piece of heaven." "Your family built something special," Eleanor said softly. "They did." Pride and something like wistfulness colored his voice. Would have meant a lot to them to see it continuing. Growing. Eleanor glanced at him. "No wife? Children of your own?" A shadow crossed his face. "Was engaged once. Caroline, daughter of a banker in Helena." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "She came out here, took one look at the place, and decided ranching wasn't the life for her after all." "I'm sorry." Jackson shrugged, but Eleanor could see the old hurt beneath the casual gesture. Probably for the best. She wouldn't have been happy here. Needs someone who loves the land, not just tolerates it. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. "Someone like you." Eleanor looked away, her heart suddenly racing. "Jackson, I can't stay forever." "You know that." "Why not?" The directness of the question startled her. "The Chapmans haven't found you in 3 months. Might never find you. But if they do—" Jackson set his cup down with deliberate care. "Then we'll face them together." Together. The word sent a tremor through Eleanor's carefully constructed defenses. "I can't ask that of you. This isn't your fight. What if I want it to be?" His eyes, when they met hers, held something that made her breath catch. "Eleanor, I'm not asking for promises. Just don't decide you have to leave before you have to." A shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, a momentary blaze of light against the encroaching night. Eleanor made a silent wish, foolish as it seemed. "All right," she whispered. "Not yet." Autumn came to Montana in a blaze of color, aspen groves turning gold against the evergreens, berry bushes crimson along the creek banks. The days grew shorter, the nights cooler. Eleanor added quilts to her bed, and William's cradle hung thick curtains to keep out drafts. The harvest season brought new tasks, preserving vegetables from the garden, smoking meat for winter, gathering firewood. Eleanor threw herself into the work, finding unexpected satisfaction in preparing for the cold months ahead, in being part of this age-old rhythm of ranch life. One crisp October morning, Jackson appeared at her door, Scout dancing excitedly around his feet. "Town day," he announced. "Thought you and William might like to come along." Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't left the ranch since arriving, the memory of pursuit still too fresh. Jackson seemed to read her thoughts. Silver Springs is tiny, nothing like the places you've been hiding from. And it might do you good to see something beyond these fences. After a moment's consideration, Eleanor nodded. You're right, we can't hide forever. The town of Silver Springs proved to be little more than a wide spot in the road. A general store, a small church, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of houses clustered around a dusty main street. But after months of isolation, it felt almost overwhelming to Eleanor. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, greeted Jackson warmly and welcomed Eleanor with friendly curiosity. "New foreman's wife?" he asked, winking at Jackson. "Guest at the ranch," Jackson corrected, a flush darkening his tan. "Mrs. Chapman and her son are staying in the foreman's cabin for a while." Mr. Peterson's bushy eyebrows rose, but he asked no more questions, instead showing Eleanor the latest shipment of fabrics while Jackson discussed an order of supplies. William, perched on Eleanor's hip, charmed everyone they met, the blacksmith's wife who cooed over his curls, the young schoolteacher who pronounced him bright as a new penny, even the grizzled old-timers playing checkers outside the saloon. "Looks just like his mama," one observed, tipping his hat to Eleanor. "Got those same pretty blue eyes." For the first time, Eleanor realized what a blessing it was that William favored her rather than Thomas. There was nothing in his appearance to connect him to the Chapmans. Nothing that would make a stranger think Boston or wealth when they looked at him. The day passed pleasantly, with lunch at the small boarding house where Mrs. Miller served the best apple pie Eleanor had ever tasted. They were just loading their purchases into the wagon when a commotion down the street caught their attention. A sleek, expensive-looking carriage had pulled up outside the saloon, drawn by a matched pair of horses that screamed money in a town where practicality usually trumped display. Two men in city clothes stepped down, one handing the driver what looked like a photograph. "Ever seen these folks around here?" the taller man asked, his Boston accent carrying clearly in the quiet street. Eleanor froze, her blood turning to ice. Jackson's hand closed firmly around her elbow. "Get in the wagon," he murmured. "Keep your head down." With William clutched to her chest, Eleanor climbed into the wagon, pulling her shawl forward to shadow her face. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain everyone must hear it. Jackson moved unhurriedly to intercept the men, positioning himself to block their view of the wagon. "Problem, gentlemen?" he asked, his stance casual but somehow conveying that the answer had better be no. "Looking for a woman and child," the taller man said. "Family matter. Reward for information." "That's so?" Jackson's voice gave nothing away. "Don't recall seeing any strangers lately, except the new schoolteacher." "Miss Parker, spinster lady, no children." "This woman would have a boy, about 8 months old now," the second man said. "Might be using the name Eleanor Chapman." Eleanor couldn't see Jackson's face, but she could picture his expression, politely blank, revealing nothing. "Chapman? Don't know the name. But I only get to town once a month or so." He turned to Mr. Peterson, who had emerged from his store. "You hear of any Chapman woman, Pete?" The storekeeper scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Can't say as I have. Though there was that widow passed through back in July, heading for Oregon." "What was her name, Martha?" "No, Margaret." The men from Boston looked disappointed, but not suspicious. "If you do hear anything, there's $50 for information leading to their whereabouts." The taller one handed Jackson a card. "Mrs. Chapman is the daughter-in-law of Harrison Chapman of Boston. The child is his grandson and heir. It's important they're found." "I'll keep an eye out," Jackson promised, pocketing the card. As the men returned to their carriage, Eleanor huddled in the wagon, trembling so hard she feared she might shatter. William, sensing her distress, began to whimper. The ride back to the ranch passed in tense silence. Only when they were safely inside the cabin, door locked behind them, did Eleanor finally break down, tears streaming down her face. "They found us," she whispered. "How did they find us?" Jackson's face was grim. "They haven't found you yet. They're just casting a wide net." "But they will." Eleanor paced the small room, William fussing in her arms. "They have money, resources. They won't stop looking." "Eleanor," Jackson caught her shoulders gently, stopping her frantic movement. "Listen to me. No one in town will talk. These people, they protect their own. I'm not their own, she said bitterly. I'm a stranger, an outsider. Not anymore. His hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. You've been here for months. You've helped with harvests and barn raisings. Mrs. Miller asks after you every time I'm in town. Mr. Peterson's wife is knitting a sweater for William for Christmas. The simple evidence of acceptance, of belonging, broke through Eleanor's panic. She stared up at Jackson, tears still wet on her cheeks. But if they come back, if they offer more money, no amount of money would make these people turn over a mother and child. Jackson's eyes blazed with a fierce certainty. That's not who they are. That's not who we are. We? The word wrapped around Eleanor like a shield. I'm afraid, she admitted, her voice small. I know. Jackson's hand came up to gently brush a tear from her cheek. But you're not alone anymore, Eleanor. You and William. You have people who care about you now. People who will stand with you. People who care. The words echoed in her mind as she looked up at this man who had offered shelter when she needed it most, who had given her work to preserve her dignity, who looked at her son with the same tenderness she felt in her own heart. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much? Something vulnerable flickered in Jackson's eyes, gone almost before she could name it. Because you're worth caring about, he said simply. Both of you. That night, after William was asleep, Eleanor sat by the fire, Scout's head heavy on her feet, thinking about belonging, about finding home in unexpected places, about a man whose quiet strength had become the foundation she built her days upon. The Chapmans would keep looking. She knew that with bone-deep certainty. But for the first time since Thomas's death, Eleanor felt something stronger than fear. She had found people worth fighting for, a place worth defending, and just maybe, a man worth loving. Outside the cabin window, the Montana stars burned bright and clear in the vast October sky, bearing silent witness to a woman's resolve and a love beginning to bloom despite the shadow of danger that lingered on the horizon. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing Silver Creek Ranch in pristine white before November's end. Eleanor stood at the cabin window, watching fat flakes swirl in the gray morning light. William toddled around the small room, delighting in his newfound mobility, Scout following patiently at his heels. 4 months at Silver Creek. 4 months of safety, of growing roots in this harsh but beautiful land. 4 months of cautious glances whenever a stranger rode up to the ranch, of scanning every face in town for Boston accents and expensive clothes. And 4 months of growing closer to Jackson Ryder, in small, significant ways that Eleanor tried not to dwell on. The way he always stopped by the cabin each evening to check on them. How he'd carved a tiny wooden horse for William. The books from his personal collection that appeared on her table. Wordsworth, Whitman, Thoreau, with passages marked that made her wonder about the quiet depths behind his steady gaze. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Jackson stood on the porch, snow dusting his shoulders, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Morning," he said, stomping his boots clean. "Thought you might want these." He held out a pair of small boots, sized for William, lined with rabbit fur, the leather soft but sturdy. "Winter's coming early this year," he explained, as Eleanor accepted them with murmured thanks. "Little ones need to keep their feet warm." William, recognizing his favorite visitor, abandoned his toys and half-crawled, half-walked across the floor, arms outstretched. Without hesitation, Jackson scooped him up, settling the boy against his broad chest with practiced ease. "You're getting big, partner," he told William seriously. "Soon you'll be helping with the cattle." Eleanor watched them together, her heart squeezing painfully. William had no memory of Thomas, would never know his real father. But here he was, forming an attachment to a man who might not be in their lives much longer. What right did she have to allow that? "Something wrong?" Jackson asked, noticing her expression. Eleanor forced a smile. Just thinking about the winter ahead. It wasn't entirely a lie. Winter in Montana meant isolation, with the roads to town often impassable for weeks. If the Chapmans' men returned, if they pressed their search, Jackson studied her face, seeing more than she wanted him to. "We're well provisioned," he said. "Plenty of food stored, firewood stacked. You and William will be comfortable." "I know." Eleanor busied herself with the coffee pot, avoiding his eyes. "You've been more than generous. Eleanor. Something in his voice made her look up. This isn't about generosity. You've earned your place here. The ranch accounts haven't been this organized in years. Mrs. Hollis says she doesn't know how we managed before you came. The simple validation warmed her more than it should have. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Jackson shifted William to his other arm, his expression turning serious. There's something I need to discuss with you. A proposition. Eleanor's heart skipped, then raced. Oh. I've been thinking about your situation. About the Chapmans and their search. The warmth drained from Eleanor's body. Have you heard something? No. Nothing like that. Jackson set William down gently. But I've been thinking about what happens if they do come back. If they find you. Eleanor's throat tightened. It was the question that haunted her nights, that woke her in cold sweats despite the safety of Silver Creek. What legal claim do they actually have on William? Jackson asked. None, if the law were fair. Eleanor's voice hardened. But Harrison Chapman is a powerful man. He's donated the courthouse clock in Boston, funded the judge's re-election campaign. The last time I saw him, he told me quite plainly that the law would see things his way. Jackson nodded, unsurprised. That's how I figured it. But what if there were a competing claim, something even their money couldn't easily override? What do you mean? Jackson took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. What if William had another legal guardian, a stepfather? The implication hung in the air between them, momentous and terrifying in its possibilities. Are you suggesting? Eleanor couldn't finish the question. Marriage, Jackson said simply. A marriage of convenience, if you will. It would give William the protection of my name, make him legally my stepson. The Chapmans would have a much harder time pressing their claim against a child with 2 living parents. Eleanor stared at him, her mind racing. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. Jackson's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. It's a practical solution to a practical problem. Practical, Eleanor echoed, the word tasting strange on her tongue. You'd marry a woman you barely know? Take on another man's child? Risk the anger of a powerful family? All for practicality? Something flickered in Jackson's eyes. Frustration, perhaps, or something deeper. I know enough, Eleanor. I know you're devoted to your son, that you're willing to sacrifice everything for him. I know you're intelligent, hard-working, honest. I know that in the months you've been here, Silver Creek has felt more like a home than it has in years. The raw honesty in his voice stole Eleanor's breath. Jackson, I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give, he continued quickly. Separate rooms, just like now. Nothing would have to change except on paper. But William would be protected. You would be protected. Eleanor turned away, moving to the window, needing space to think. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and strange. Rather like this conversation. This is a lot to consider, she said finally. Of course. Jackson picked up his hat, preparing to leave. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. Whenever, if ever, you decide. At the door, he paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Just so you know, Eleanor, there's nothing merely practical about how I feel about you and William. Nothing at all. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Eleanor standing in the middle of the cabin, her thoughts in turmoil, William playing contentedly at her feet, unaware that his future hung in the balance of his mother's decision. That evening, after William was asleep, Eleanor sat by the fire with Mrs. Hollis, who had trudged through the snow to deliver a fresh loaf of bread and, Eleanor suspected, to check on her after Jackson's visit. He told you then, the housekeeper said, settling into the rocking chair with a sigh. Eleanor looked up from her mending. You knew? Been on his mind for weeks, Mrs. Hollis admitted. Wanted my advice, which is a first. That boy usually makes up his mind without consulting anyone. And what did you tell him? Mrs. Hollis's weathered face softened. Told him to follow his heart, which I suspect is what he's doing, though he'd never admit it. Eleanor set down her sewing. Mrs. Hollis, he hardly knows me. Knows you better than you think, the older woman countered. Sees how you are with that boy. How you've taken to ranch life. How you treat everyone who crosses your path with kindness and respect. She leaned forward. And I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching. Heat rushed to Eleanor's cheeks. I don't. No need to pretend with me, dear. Mrs. Hollis patted her hand. Life's too short, and winters are too long for that kind of foolishness. The question isn't what you feel or don't feel, it's what you're going to do about it. After Mrs. Hollis left, Eleanor sat long into the night, watching the fire die down to embers, weighing her options, her fears, her growing feelings for a man who offered protection without demands, security without expectations. A marriage of convenience. The phrase felt like a relic from another time, another world. And yet, wasn't that what she'd had with Thomas, at least at first? A union based on mutual advantage. His need for a companion, her need for security after her father's death. Love had grown later, slowly, like a garden carefully tended. Could it happen again? Did she want it to? The morning dawned clear and cold. The world outside transformed into a glittering wonderland. Eleanor dressed William warmly, pulled on her own coat, and walked the path to the main house, her decision made in the quiet hours before dawn. She found Jackson in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. He straightened when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. Eleanor, is everything all right? Yes. She set William down to toddle around the clean straw. I've been thinking about your proposal. Jackson waited, giving her the space to continue. It's a generous offer, she said. But I need to be clear about something first. Anything. Eleanor took a deep breath. I won't enter another marriage based on false premises. If we do this, if I accept, I need to know it's not just about William's legal protection. I need to know what you truly want from this arrangement. Jackson's eyes never left hers. The truth? Always. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cold barn. I want a partner, he said simply. Someone to share this life with. I want to wake up each morning knowing you and William are under my roof, safe and happy. I want to hear your thoughts at the end of each day, see your smile across the dinner table. His voice dropped lower. I want the chance to see if what I'm feeling, what I think you might be feeling too, could grow into something real and lasting. The raw honesty of his words stripped away Eleanor's carefully constructed defenses. This wasn't the elegant courtship Thomas had offered, with flowers and poetry and promises of a grand Boston life. This was something more fundamental, a man offering his heart alongside his protection, asking only for the chance to love and be loved in return. Yes, she whispered, her voice suddenly thick with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you, Jackson Ryder. Joy blazed across his face, transforming his usual stoic expression into something so beautiful it made Eleanor's heart ache. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached for her, drawing her into his arms for the first time. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Then Eleanor's arms slid around his neck, and something ignited between them. A heat, a recognition, a coming home. William's delighted squeal broke the moment. They turned to find him beaming at them, clapping his small hands as if approving the scene before him. Jackson laughed, a deep, rich sound that Eleanor realized she'd rarely heard before. He scooped William up with one arm, keeping the other around Eleanor's waist. Well, partner, he said to the boy, looks like we're going to be a family. They were married 2 weeks later in the Silver Springs church, with snow piled high outside the windows and lamplight casting a golden glow over the simple ceremony. Mrs. Hollis stood as Eleanor's witness, beaming through happy tears. The ranch hands filled the first row, uncomfortably scrubbed and dressed in their Sunday best. Even Scout had been bathed for the occasion, a blue ribbon tied around his neck. Eleanor wore a dress of deep blue velvet, a gift from the women of Silver Springs, who had pooled their resources to purchase the fabric from Mr. Peterson's store and stayed up late sewing it by lamplight. William, perched on Mrs. Miller's lap, wore a tiny suit that matched Jackson's black one. "I, Jackson Ryder, take you, Eleanor Chapman, to be my lawfully wedded wife." As Jackson's steady voice filled the small church, Eleanor looked up into his face and saw not calculation or compromise but genuine joy. This was no mere arrangement, no business transaction. Whatever had brought them to this moment, fear, practicality, the Chapmans, threat, what they were building now was real. "I, Eleanor Chapman, take you, Jackson Ryder, to be my lawfully wedded husband." Her voice remained steady as she spoke the ancient words, words that bound her to this man who had offered shelter when she needed it most, who looked at her son with a father's love, who saw her strength rather than her vulnerability. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Pastor Williams declared. "Jackson, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, a promise exchanged without words. When they turned to face the small congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Jackson Ryder, Eleanor felt a sense of rightness settle over her, as if some piece of herself that had been adrift, had walked, finally found its mooring. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, the main house filled with laughter, music, and the delicious smells of Mrs. Hollis's cooking. Eleanor moved through the rooms that were now officially her home, accepting congratulations, watching as Jackson showed William to everyone as proudly as if the boy were his own flesh and blood. "He's a good man," Mrs. Miller said, appearing at Eleanor's elbow with a cup of punch. "One of the best in the territory." "I know," Eleanor said softly, her eyes following Jackson as he accepted a handshake from Mr. Peterson. "And he's been alone too long," the older woman continued. "Needed someone to remind him there's more to life than cattle and crops." Eleanor smiled. "I think we needed each other." As the evening wore on, as neighbors began the journey home through the snow, Eleanor found herself standing by the fireplace, watching as Jackson said goodbye to the last guests. William had fallen asleep hours ago, curled up in his new bedroom upstairs. "Happy?" Jackson asked, coming to stand beside her as the door closed behind Pastor Williams. Eleanor looked around the room that had been transformed in the past weeks, her books now mingled with his on the shelves, her mother's silver hairbrush on the mantel, William's wooden horse on the hearthrug. "Yes," she said simply. "Are you?" Jackson's hand found hers, his calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones, more than I ever thought possible. That night, as snow fell softly outside, Eleanor discovered that the passion between them matched the tenderness, that a marriage begun for protection could burn with a fire all its own, that two broken hearts could find wholeness in each other's arms. Winter settled over Silver Creek Ranch, turning short days into long nights spent by the fire, reading aloud from Jackson's books, teaching William new words, planning for the spring planting. Eleanor found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life, as if she'd been born to it, as if Boston and the Chapmans and her old life were nothing but a distant dream. But reality intruded one bitter January day in the form of a letter delivered by the monthly mail rider who braved the mountain passes between larger towns and the isolated ranches. "For you, Mrs. Ryder," the young man said, handing Eleanor a thick envelope addressed in an elegant hand she recognized immediately. "Margaret Chapman, Thomas's mother." Eleanor's hands trembled as she accepted it. The mail rider continued on his route, unaware of the bomb he'd just delivered. She waited until she was alone in the kitchen to open it, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain Jackson would hear it from the barn where he was working. "My dear Eleanor," the letter began, the formality at odds with the coldness that had always existed between them. "I hope this letter finds you and my grandson well. It has been brought to my attention that you have remarried to a rancher in Montana named Jackson Ryder." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. They knew. How did they know? While Harrison remains adamant that William belongs with his blood relations, I find myself questioning whether further pursuit serves anyone's best interest. "My son loved you, Eleanor, despite our objections. He would want his son raised with love, which I believe you provide in abundance." Eleanor sat heavily in a kitchen chair, the letter shaking in her hands. "I have not shared the details of your location with Harrison. This is between us women, a mother's heart speaking to another mother's heart. All I ask is that you allow William to know of his heritage when he is old enough to understand it, and that perhaps someday you might consider allowing us to meet him." The letter continued with details of a trust fund established in William's name, to be accessed when he turned 21, and concluded with a sentiment that brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. Thomas would be proud of the mother you have become, of the lengths you have gone to protect his son. Perhaps in time, I can find it in my heart to be proud as well. With sincere regards, Margaret Chapman. Eleanor was still sitting there, the letter clutched in her hand, when Jackson returned from the barn, stomping snow from his boots. "Eleanor, what is it?" He crossed to her side immediately, concern etched on his face. Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. She watched his expression change as he read, from wariness to surprise to cautious relief. "Do you believe her?" he asked when he finished. "That she won't tell Harrison?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. Margaret was always the quieter one, letting Harrison make the decisions. But she loved Thomas fiercely. And I think she recognized something of that same love in what I've done for William. Jackson set the letter on the table, pulling up a chair to sit across from her, taking her hands in his. "What do you want to do?" The question was so simple, yet so profound. For months, Eleanor's every decision had been driven by fear, by the need to stay one step ahead of the Chapmans. Now, for the first time, she had a choice. "I want to trust her," she said finally. "I want William to know about Thomas, about his heritage, the good parts of it anyway. And someday, when he's older, if he wants to meet his grandparents, then we'll make that happen." Jackson finished for her. "Together. Together." The words still had the power to warm Eleanor from the inside out. "Does this change anything for you?" she asked, a note of vulnerability creeping into her voice. Now that the immediate danger might be past, understanding dawned in Jackson's eyes. "Eleanor Ryder," he said, his voice low and intense, "I didn't marry you because you needed protection. I married you because somewhere between finding you in that abandoned cabin and watching you breathe life back into this ranch, I fell in love with you." It was the first time he'd said the words directly, though his actions had spoken them 100 times over. "I love you too," Eleanor whispered, the truth of it spreading through her like sunlight. "So much it frightens me sometimes." Jackson's hand came up to cup her cheek. "No more fear," he promised. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." As if to seal the promise, William toddled into the kitchen at that moment, scouted his heels, both looking expectantly at the adults as if sensing something momentous had occurred. Jackson scooped the boy up, settling him on his knee. "Well, partner, looks like we might have to take a trip to Boston someday. Show those city folks what a real Montana man looks like." Eleanor's laugh bubbled up, unexpected and joyous. The future, which had seemed so dark and uncertain when she'd fled Boston with nothing but a baby and a half-starved dog, now stretched before her bright with possibility. Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the soil, new calves wobbling beside their mothers in the pastures, wildflowers dotting the creek banks with splashes of color. Eleanor stood on the porch of the main house, her house now, in every sense, watching as Jackson and William played in the yard, the boys' delighted laughter carrying on the fresh breeze. Scout lounged nearby, gray now around the muzzle but still vigilant, still the faithful guardian he'd been since Boston. "Mama, look!" William called, his vocabulary expanding daily. "Horse!" Jackson had hoisted him onto his shoulders, and the boy's perspective made him feel like he was riding one of the ranch's prized stallions. "I see you, my brave rider," Eleanor called back, her heart so full it felt it might overflow. In her hand, she held another letter from Margaret Chapman, this one containing a photograph of Thomas that William might have someday, and news that Harrison had finally accepted, however reluctantly, that his grandson was being raised by loving parents. The threat that had hung over them for so long had finally, truly lifted. As Eleanor watched her husband and son, for Jackson was William's father now in every way that mattered, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The desperate flight from Boston, The broken wagon wheel, the stormy night in an abandoned cabin, and the tall stranger who had appeared in the doorway with kindness in his eyes and warmth in his hands. "Stay, if they'll let me help," he had said that night, offering shelter without demands, protection without price. Eleanor hadn't known then that she was meeting the man who would become her heart's true home, that the help he offered would transform into a love neither of them had been looking for, but both had desperately needed. Jackson looked up, catching her watching them. The smile that spread across his face, open, joyful, a world away from the reserved man who had found her by the fire with a dog and a baby, made Eleanor's breath catch. He set William down gently, whispering something in the boy's ear that sent him running toward Eleanor with arms outstretched. "Mama!" "Up!" Eleanor gathered her son close, breathing in his sweet scent, marveling at how much he'd grown, how strong and happy he'd become in this place of safety and love. Jackson joined them on the porch, one arm slipping naturally around Eleanor's waist, the other ruffling William's curls. "What do you think, Mrs. Ryder?" he asked, nodding toward the blooming landscape before them. "Is Montana agreeing with you?" Eleanor leaned into his solid warmth, her son in her arms, her husband at her side, the ranch stretching before them like a promise kept. "More than agreeing," she said softly. "It's become my home." She looked up into Jackson's blue eyes, seeing her future reflected there. "You've become my home." The kiss they shared, sweet and tender with their son giggling between them, was a testament to what could grow from the most desperate of beginnings. Hope from despair, family from strangers, love from a simple offer of help on a stormy night. And as the spring breeze carried the scent of new growth and possibility across Silver Creek Ranch, Eleanor Chapman Ryder knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found what she'd been searching for all along. Not just safety or security, but belonging. A place to put down roots. A love to call her own. A home. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye, seasons flowing one into another, each leaving its mark on Silver Creek Ranch and the family that called it home. The spring calving, summer haying, fall roundups, and winter planning became the familiar rhythm of their lives, punctuated by William's milestones and the deepening bond between Eleanor and Jackson. On a golden afternoon in late September, Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching 7-year-old William race across the yard, his legs now long and sturdy, his curls turned from baby fine to thick and dark like his father's had been. Scout, now elderly but still devoted, followed at a more sedate pace, content to watch over his boy from a comfortable distance. "Papa, look how high I can jump," William called to Jackson, who was mending a fence nearby. Jackson set down his tools, giving his full attention to the boy's demonstration with the same seriousness he might give to a business proposition. "That's at least 3 feet, partner," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Keep that up, you'll be jumping horses before long." Eleanor smiled, her hand absently moving to rest on the gentle swell of her belly. After years of hoping, of monthly disappointments quietly born, new life was growing within her. A brother or sister for William, a child born of the love she and Jackson had built from the most unlikely of beginnings. They hadn't told William yet, wanting to wait until the doctor confirmed all was well. Eleanor was 30 now, and though Dr. Wilson had assured her she was healthy and strong, caution tempered their joy. Deep thoughts? Eleanor turned to find Mrs. Hollis watching her with knowing eyes. The housekeeper had stayed on after the marriage, claiming she was too old to learn new ways. But Eleanor suspected she simply couldn't bear to leave the family she'd helped bring together. "Just watching my boys," Eleanor replied, her smile soft with contentment. Mrs. Hollis's gaze dropped to Eleanor's midsection, a knowing look crossing her weathered face. "And thinking about who might be joining them soon," Eleanor laughed softly. "Nothing escapes you, does it?" "Not much," Mrs. Hollis admitted, coming to stand beside her at the window. "How far along?" "About 4 months. We're waiting to tell William until after I see Dr. Wilson next week." The older woman nodded approvingly. "Smart. Though that boy's so happy and secure, I doubt anything could shake him now, even sharing his papa with a little brother or sister." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. It was true. William had blossomed at Silver Creek, growing from the frightened baby she'd clutched to her chest in that abandoned cabin, into a confident, joyful child who had no memory of a time when Jackson wasn't his father. They'd been honest with him, in ways appropriate to his age, about Thomas. A photograph of his birth father sat on his bedroom shelf, and he knew that before Jackson, there had been another man who had loved his mother and whose blood ran in William's veins. Someday there would be more difficult conversations, explanations about the Chapmans, and why they had fled Boston. But for now, it was enough that he understood he was deeply loved by both the father he'd lost and the one who had chosen him. "The mail rider's coming," Mrs. Hollis noted, nodding toward the road where a figure on horseback approached. "Looks like he's got something for us." The monthly mail delivery was always an event at Silver Creek, bringing news from the outside world, letters from Jackson's sister in Denver, occasional correspondence from Margaret Chapman, who had kept her word about not revealing their whereabouts to Harrison. The tentative relationship between Eleanor and her former mother-in-law had evolved over the years into something approaching mutual respect, bound by their shared love for William. Jackson came in from the yard, William dancing around him excitedly. "Do you think Aunt Catherine sent me another book, Papa? She promised one about pirates?" "We'll find out soon enough," Jackson said, catching Eleanor's eye with a smile that still, after all these years, made her heart flutter. He'd grown more handsome with age, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, only adding to his appeal. The mail rider, a young man named Charlie who had taken over the route the previous year, dismounted at the gate. "Afternoon, riders," he called cheerfully. "Got quite a haul for you today." In addition to the expected letter from Catherine and a package that did indeed appear to be a book, Charlie handed Jackson a thick envelope bearing the return address of a Boston law firm. Eleanor felt a chill despite the warm September sun. Legal correspondence from Boston could only mean one thing: the Chapmans. "Thank you, Charlie," Jackson said calmly, though Eleanor noted the tension in his shoulders. "Care to come in for some coffee before you continue your route?" "Don't mind if I do," Charlie replied, oblivious to the undercurrent of concern his delivery had caused. "Got news from Helena you might want to hear, Mr. Ryder. Railroads expanding westward faster than expected. Could mean good things for cattle prices next season." As the men discussed business over coffee and Mrs. Hollis plied Charlie with freshly baked cookies, Eleanor took the Boston letter to the study, her heart pounding. William had run back outside with Scout, absorbed in the new book from his aunt, leaving Eleanor and Jackson to face whatever news had arrived together. Jackson joined her moments later, closing the door behind him. "Charlie's on his way," he said, moving to Eleanor's side. "Shall we see what Boston has to say?" Eleanor nodded, her mouth too dry for speech. Jackson broke the seal and unfolded several pages of formal legal language. His expression remained neutral as he read, giving nothing away until he reached the end. "Harrison Chapman is dead," he said finally, looking up at Eleanor. "Heart failure, 2 weeks ago." Eleanor sank into a chair, a complex wave of emotions washing over her. Relief, yes. The man who had threatened to take her son was gone. But also a strange sadness for what might have been. For the grandfather William would never truly know. "There's more," Jackson continued, scanning the document again. "The estate is in probate, but it seems Harrison left specific provisions regarding William." Eleanor tensed. "What kind of provisions?" "A trust fund, separate from the one Margaret established. Significant funds to be released in stages: education, 21st birthday, marriage." Jackson looked up, his expression softening. "And a letter to be delivered to William when he turns 18. "A letter?" Eleanor's voice caught. "Saying what?" "The lawyers don't specify. It's sealed." Eleanor rose, moving to the window that overlooked the yard where William played, blissfully unaware of the grandfather who had died without ever meeting him, of the complex legacy now attached to his name. "We always knew this day would come," Jackson said quietly, coming to stand behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "When the past would reach forward to touch our lives again." Eleanor leaned back against his solid strength. "I just hoped it would be later. When William was older, better able to understand." "He doesn't need to know everything now," Jackson pointed out. "Just that his grandfather has died, that he left William a gift for his future. The rest can wait until he's ready." Eleanor turned in his arms, searching his face. "Are you worried? About the money? About what it might mean for him?" Jackson considered the question seriously, as he did all matters concerning their family. "Money itself isn't good or bad," he said finally. "It's the values that come with it. William has been raised with solid values: hard work, honesty, compassion. That won't change because of an inheritance." His wisdom, as always, steadied her. "You're right. Of course you're right." "Besides," Jackson added, a smile touching his lips, "a good education is nothing to turn down. Harvard might not be ready for a Montana ranch boy, but I suspect our son could teach them a thing or two." "Our son." The words, spoken so naturally after years of shared parenthood, warmed Eleanor from within. Whatever the future held, William would face it with the love of two parents who had chosen each other and chosen him, creating a family bound by something stronger than blood or legal documents. "We should tell him about the baby soon," she said, her hand finding Jackson's and guiding it to her stomach. "Before he notices on his own." Jackson's eyes lit with joy, as they always did when she mentioned the pregnancy. "How about tonight? Just the three of us." That evening, after supper, they sat William down in the living room, the fire crackling cheerfully in the hearth, Scout dozing nearby. "We have some news, son," Jackson began, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "Two pieces of news, actually. One happy, one sad." William looked between them, his eyes, so like Thomas's, Eleanor sometimes thought with a pang, serious and attentive. "What is it?" "The sad news first," Eleanor said gently. "Your grandfather Chapman in Boston has passed away." William considered this, his brow furrowing slightly. "The one I've never met? Who's in the photographs Grandmother Margaret sends?" "Yes, that's right." "Are you sad, Mama?" he asked perceptively. Eleanor smiled at his concern. "A little. Mostly I'm sad that you never got to meet him, and that he never got to know what a wonderful boy you are." William nodded, processing this information with the straightforward acceptance of childhood. "Will we go to Boston for the funeral?" "The funeral has already happened," Jackson explained. "But your grandmother Margaret has invited us to visit this spring." "We're thinking about going." Eleanor and Jackson had discussed the possibility late into the previous night. With Harrison gone, there was no reason not to make the journey, to let William see the city of his birth, to meet the grandmother who had maintained a distant but persistent presence in his life through letters and small gifts. "I'd like that," William said, brightening. "Grandmother Margaret always describes Boston as having buildings taller than trees." "It does indeed," Eleanor confirmed, remembering the city she'd left behind so long ago. "But now for the happy news." She glanced at Jackson, who nodded encouragingly. "William, how would you feel about having a little brother or sister?" The boy's eyes widened, darting to Eleanor's middle with sudden understanding. "There's a baby in there?" he asked, half incredulous, half excited. "Yes," Eleanor laughed. "Due to arrive sometime in February." "A baby," William repeated, testing the word. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" "We don't know yet," Jackson replied. "What would you prefer?" William considered this seriously. A brother would be good for fishing, but a sister might be nice too. He looked up at them, suddenly concerned. "Will you still have time for me when the baby comes?" Eleanor's heart contracted. "Oh, my darling, of course we will. Having another child doesn't divide our love. It multiplies it." "Like in mathematics?" William asked. "Always the practical one." Jackson chuckled. "Exactly like mathematics. Our family is growing, but you'll always be our firstborn, the one who made us a family to begin with." The worry cleared from William's face, replaced by excitement. "Can I help name the baby? Bobby Miller's little sister is named after a flower. Could we name our baby after something from the ranch?" "I think that's a wonderful idea," Eleanor said, relieved at his acceptance. "We'll make a list of possibilities together." Later, after William was tucked into bed with promises of baby-naming discussions in the morning, Eleanor and Jackson sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. He took that well, Jackson observed, both pieces of news. He's resilient, Eleanor said softly, and secure in our love. That makes all the difference. Jackson's hand moved to cover hers, where it rested on her growing belly, just like this little one will be. Eleanor tilted her face up to his. Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting? If my wagon wheel hadn't broken that night, if the storm hadn't driven me to that cabin, if I hadn't noticed the smoke from the road, Jackson continued, if you hadn't trusted me enough to open the door, so many small choices leading to this moment. Jackson's eyes, warm in the firelight, held hers. I've never been a man who believed much in fate, Eleanor. Always figured we make our own way in this world through hard work and determination. His hand tightened gently over hers. But you and William coming into my life, sometimes that feels like more than chance. Eleanor thought of the desperate young widow she'd been, fleeing Boston with nothing but a baby and a half-starved dog, and the taciturn rancher who'd appeared in the doorway of an abandoned cabin, offering help without conditions. Maybe it was fate, she said softly. Or maybe it was just two good people, recognizing something worth fighting for in each other. Jackson's kiss, tender after years of marriage, yet still capable of quickening her pulse, was answer enough. Spring came early the following year, bringing with it not only the usual calving season and spring planting, but a new addition to the Ryder family. Eleanor Rose Ryder arrived on a clear February morning, howling her displeasure at leaving the warm comfort of her mother's womb, with a vigor that made Dr. Wilson laugh. Strong lungs, he pronounced. Takes after her father. Jackson, holding his daughter for the first time with a mixture of awe and terror that Eleanor found endearing, looked up with suspiciously bright eyes. She's perfect, he whispered. Just like her mother. William, allowed into the room once Eleanor was cleaned up and resting comfortably, approached the tiny bundle in his father's arms with wide-eyed curiosity. She's so small, he marveled. And red. You looked just the same when you were born, Eleanor assured him, reaching out to squeeze his hand. Would you like to hold your sister? The care with which William accepted the swaddled infant, the protective way his arms cradled her, the soft wonderment in his voice as he whispered hello, brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Whatever the future held, these two children would have each other, a bond that would sustain them through life's inevitable challenges. By May, Eleanor had recovered enough to consider the journey to Boston. Margaret Chapman's invitation, reiterated in a letter following Eleanor Rose's birth, had taken on a new urgency with the news that the older woman's health was failing. If William is to meet his grandmother, it should be soon, Eleanor told Jackson as they discussed the trip one evening. And I'd like her to meet Eleanor Rose as well. Jackson nodded, though concern lingered in his eyes. Are you sure you're strong enough for such a journey? It's a long way to Boston, especially with a baby. I'm stronger than I look, Eleanor reminded him with a smile. Always have been. The decision made, preparations began in earnest. Jackson would stay behind to manage the ranch. Someone had to, and the spring was too crucial a time for both of them to leave. Mrs. Hollis would accompany Eleanor and the children, providing an extra pair of hands and a familiar presence for William in the strange city. The night before their departure, after the children were asleep, Eleanor found Jackson in the barn, methodically checking the harness for the wagon that would take them to the train station in Helena. Everything's ready, she said, coming to stand beside him. William's too excited to sleep, but I finally got him to stay in bed with promises of an extra cookie for breakfast. Jackson nodded, his hands continuing their work, though there was nothing left to check. Eleanor recognized the signs of his worry, the tightness around his mouth, the furrow between his brows. Jackson, she said softly, laying her hand over his. We'll be fine. He looked up then, his eyes meeting hers in the lantern light. I know you will. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Eleanor Ryder. He turned his hand to clasp hers. I just keep thinking about the last time you traveled east with a child. What you were running from. Understanding dawned. You're worried about the Chapmans? About them trying to keep William? Harrison is gone, but there's still family there. Cousins, business associates. Eleanor stepped closer, resting her free hand against his cheek. "William is our son Jackson. Legally, and in every way that matters. No one can change that now." Jackson turned his face to press a kiss against her palm. "I know, I'm being foolish." "Not foolish," Eleanor corrected gently. "Protective. It's one of the things I love most about you." The journey to Boston was long but uneventful. The Transcontinental Railroad, having made travel east considerably more comfortable than Eleanor's desperate flight west had been years before. William was fascinated by the changing landscape outside the train windows, the vast plains giving way to forests, and then the increasingly crowded settlements of the east. Eleanor Rose, true to her sweet temperament, mostly slept through the journey, waking only to nurse and charm their fellow passengers with her bright smile and copper curls, a perfect blend of her parents' coloring. Boston, when they finally arrived, was both familiar and strange to Eleanor. The city had grown, become more crowded, more modern. Electrical lights now illuminated some streets, horseless carriages occasionally puttering past alongside more traditional conveyances. Margaret Chapman had sent a carriage to meet them at the station, the driver holding a sign with "Rider" written in elegant script. As they approached, he tipped his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Rider, I'm James, Mrs. Chapman's driver. She's most eager to see you and the children." The Chapman mansion on Beacon Hill was exactly as Eleanor remembered it. Imposing, elegant, a symbol of old Boston wealth and privilege. As the carriage pulled up to the entrance, Eleanor felt a momentary panic. What was she doing, bringing her children into the very place she'd fled from? But then William's excited voice broke through her anxiety. "Is this where my father was born, Mama? Where you lived before?" "Yes," Eleanor said, finding her center again in her son's curious face. "This is where Thomas grew up, and where you were born." The front door opened, and a figure appeared. Not the imperious Harrison Chapman who had haunted Eleanor's nightmares, but Margaret, noticeably thinner than in Eleanor's memory, leaning on the arm of a maid. "Eleanor," she called, her voice wavering slightly. "William." At last. William, briefed on what to expect, stepped forward with the natural confidence of a child raised in love. "Hello, Grandmother Chapman. I'm William Thomas Rider." Margaret's eyes, the same shade as Thomas's had been, as William's were now, filled with tears. "Yes, you are," she said softly. "And you look so very much like your father." The initial awkwardness faded quickly as Margaret welcomed them inside, insisting on holding Eleanor Rose, exclaiming over her beauty and strength. "She has your eyes, Eleanor," she observed, "but something of Jackson in her chin, I think." Strong. The week that followed was a time of healing, of bridges carefully rebuilt across the chasm of the past. Margaret showed William the house where his father had grown up, shared stories of Thomas as a boy, handled with careful respect the questions about why William's parents had left Boston. "Your grandfather was a complicated man," she told William during a walk in the public garden, Eleanor following a few steps behind, close enough to intervene if needed but giving them space to connect. "He loved your father very much, but he had very fixed ideas about how life should be lived. When your parents chose a different path, he didn't know how to accept that. Papa says sometimes the hardest thing is to let people you love make their own choices," William replied with the simple wisdom of childhood. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Your papa sounds like a very wise man." "He is," William said confidently. "He teaches me something new every day." Later, when William was exploring the library with the housekeeper, Margaret turned to Eleanor with genuine contrition in her eyes. "I owe you an apology, Eleanor, for not standing up to Harrison sooner, for allowing him to threaten your right to raise your own child." Eleanor shook her head. "That's in the past now, Margaret." "Not entirely." The older woman reached for a leather portfolio on a nearby table. "There are still matters to address. The trust funds, for one. And this." She handed Eleanor an envelope sealed with the Chapman family crest. "Harrison's letter to William. I've read it. The lawyers allowed me that much. It's not what you might fear." Eleanor accepted it with steady hands. "What does it say?" Margaret's expression softened with something like wonder. "It's an apology, Eleanor, written in his last months, when he knew he was dying. Harrison was too proud to make amends in person, but in this letter he acknowledges his mistakes. He asks William for forgiveness." Emotion tightened Eleanor's throat. "I never thought—" "Neither did I," Margaret admitted. "Perhaps facing one's mortality brings clarity. Or, perhaps like me, he simply realized over time that a grandson raised with love, even far away, even by people not of his choosing, was better than a grandson raised in bitterness and resentment under his own roof." Eleanor thought of Silver Creek Ranch, of William racing across the pastures on his pony, of Jackson teaching him to rope cattle, of family dinners filled with laughter and easy conversation. So different from the formal, constrained upbringing that would have been his in this mansion. "He's happy," she said simply. "Loved, safe." "I can see that," Margaret agreed. "It shines from him like a light. You and Jackson have given him what every child deserves, a home built on love and respect." She reached for Eleanor's hand. "Thank you for allowing me to be part of his life, even from a distance, and for bringing him here now." The visit concluded with promises of future correspondence, of perhaps a trip west for Margaret if her health permitted, of photographs to be exchanged regularly so that the growing children would know their Boston family. As the train pulled away from the station, William waved excitedly from the window until the platform disappeared from view. "I like Grandmother Margaret," he declared, settling back in his seat. "She tells good stories about Father Thomas." Eleanor smiled, adjusting Eleanor Rose against her shoulder. "I'm glad, sweetheart. It's important to know where you come from." "But I'm still a rider," William said with absolute certainty. "Even if my first name is Chapman, I'm still Papa's son." "Yes, you are," Eleanor agreed, her heart full. "Always and forever." The Montana landscape welcomed them home with a riot of spring wildflowers, the mountains rising blue and snow-capped against the horizon, the familiar silhouette of Silver Creek Ranch appearing in the distance as James, their ranch hand, drove the wagon from Helena. Jackson was waiting at the gate, Scout at his heels, his face breaking into a smile that outshone the sun when he spotted them. William was out of the wagon before it fully stopped, launching himself into his father's waiting arms with the absolute confidence of a child who knew he was loved beyond measure. "Papa, we saw buildings taller than trees, and I rode in a horseless carriage, and Grandmother Margaret has a library bigger than our whole house." Jackson laughed, swinging the boy up onto his shoulders. "Sounds like quite an adventure, partner." His eyes sought Eleanor's over William's head, a question in their depths. "Everything's fine," she assured him, descending from the wagon with Eleanor Rose secure in her arms. "Better than fine, actually." Later, after the children were asleep, after the stories of Boston had been shared and the gifts unpacked, Eleanor and Jackson sat on the porch in the soft spring twilight, her head resting against his shoulder as they watched the stars emerge one by one. "So the Chapmans are truly at peace with things?" Jackson asked, his arm tightening protectively around her shoulders. "Margaret is," Eleanor confirmed, and Harrison, in his way, came to terms with it before the end. She told him about the letter, safely stored away for William when he was old enough to understand its significance. "People can surprise you," Jackson mused. "Even the ones you think are set in their ways." Eleanor smiled, thinking of the frightened young widow she'd been, and the wary rancher who'd found her by a dying fire. Sometimes the greatest surprises come from within ourselves, from discovering strengths we never knew we had. Jackson turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the first stars of evening. "You've always been strong, Eleanor. From the first moment I saw you protecting your son with nothing but determination and love. We made each other stronger." She corrected softly. "That's what family does." As if in agreement, a cry floated from the open window of the nursery. Eleanor rose, demanding her evening feeding with typical rider determination. Jackson chuckled, pressing a kiss to Eleanor's temple before she rose. "She has her mother's sense of timing." Eleanor paused in the doorway, looking back at this man who had offered shelter on a stormy night and ended up giving her a home in every sense of the word. "I love you, Jackson Ryder." His smile, tender in the gathering dusk, was answer enough. But he said the words anyway, as he did every day, a promise renewed with each sunrise. "I love you too, Eleanor, more than I have words to say." As she went to tend their daughter, as Jackson settled back to watch the Montana night unfold around their home, Eleanor thought of the journey that had brought them here, of a desperate flight from Boston, of a broken wagon wheel, of a stormy night and an abandoned cabin, of a tall stranger appearing in the doorway saying words that had changed the course of her life. "Stay, if they'll let me help." Sometimes, Eleanor reflected, gathering her daughter into her arms, the greatest journeys begin with the simplest choices: to trust, to hope, to stay when every instinct screams to run. And sometimes, the hand extended in the darkest moment becomes the one you hold for a lifetime. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.